Back now with more In the Loop. I'm Lisa Labez in for Sasha Ann Simons. Illinois needs more housing. The Illinois Economic Policy Institute and the Project for Middle Class Renewal at the University of Illinois report the state needs to build over 200,000 housing units over 5 years just to keep pace with demand. Governor J.B. Pritzker has a plan to address this housing shortage. He's calling it the BUILD Plan, Building Up Illinois Developments. BUILD. So by easing zoning restrictions, the idea is to make building multi-unit developments easier. Now, housing advocates are excited by this proposal, and some Illinois municipalities have some concerns. So coming up, we're going to hear from both perspectives. You'll hear from Illinois Realtors CEO Jeff Baker and the village president in Riverside, Doug Pollock. We'll hear from them in just a few minutes. First, I want to get the basics from WBEZ's State House reporter, Mawa Iqbal. Hi, Mawa.
Hey, Lisa.
All right. Tell us a little bit. What should people know about the BUILD plan?
Yeah, it's a sweeping package, and it's in fact one of the main priorities that Governor Pritzker had laid out in his budget proposal back in February. And so essentially what it does, so sort of the big broad strokes is that local zoning boards would no longer be allowed to prohibit property owners from building, like you said earlier, multi-unit housing on residential lots. The idea is to basically make it like a more standardized statewide system for building multi-unit housing, right? So it also applies to more like accessory dwelling units, attached or detached secondary residence, like granny flats, backyard cottages. So those would also be legalized in all properties zoned for residential use. And this is especially notable for people in Chicago because the city moved last year to relax its 60-year ban on granny flats.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of provisions pertaining to the actual like permitting process for building. So if local governments don't complete an inspection or review within a certain number of days, the applicant would actually be able to use a qualified third-party firm to do it. Instead of having to go with the local municipality or township or whatever the case may be. It would also prohibit minimum parking requirements on middle housing, and then exempt affordable developments from municipal parking requirements. And the idea, right, is basically that, Governor Pritzker was saying that he wants to make, a sort of a standardized system, right? So that this patchwork of local barriers and local, red tape has, what he says, impeded on the development of housing and ultimately driven up costs for people statewide.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about that. How bad is Illinois' housing supply right now?
Yeah, so Illinois currently faces a shortage of about 142,000 housing units. And according to the governor's office, the state would need to build 227,000 units over the next 5 years to keep up with the pace of demand.
Right.
The supply crisis has cost Illinois approximately $2 billion in brokerage activity and about $9.7 billion in gross economic impact in the last 5 years alone.
Okay. And I think a big part of the problem is affordability. There are available housing units, but they're just too expensive for a lot of people.
Right. And this is an interesting part of the debate, too. A lot of the opponents of this bill say that, that this package may increase and spur the development of more housing. But is it really affordable housing? And, the affordability landscape in Illinois currently. So I was looking up data and it looks like in March 2026, home prices in Illinois were up almost 5% compared to last year. And the median price, of course, this varies based on where in the state you're living. But the median price for a home was $314,000. There's also data that suggests that home prices have been jumping since February 2019 by nearly 50%. So even though costs are about 20% lower than the national average in Illinois, rapid prices increases and limited supply have all contributed to this strained affordability issue for families.
All right, gotcha. All right. So the spring legislative session ends at the end of the month in, 16 days. What is the status of this bill?
So it hasn't actually been assigned to any committees yet, which that would usually be the first step in a bill, or that a bill must take in order to eventually get in front of the whole chamber to be voted and read 3 times before it passes on to the second chamber. But, anything can happen in Springfield, as they say. Even though we do have only 2.5 weeks left in session, it's very possible that this bill language could essentially be copy-pasted as an amendment to another bill that's already done much of that process so that it could, speed through the chamber. So we shall see what ends up happening.
We shall see. All right. Thanks for the update. That's WBEZ State House reporter Mawa Iqbal. Thank you for taking the time, Mawa.
Thank you.
And now I want to turn to our other guests. In the studio with me, I've got Riverside Village President Doug Pollock. And on the phone, we've got Jeff Baker, who is CEO of Illinois Realtors. Good morning. All right. Let's. Good morning, Mr. Baker. So let's be clear. We all agree there is a need for more housing, and we would like to see more development in communities all over the state. Correct, Mr. Baker? Do you want to start?
Yeah, I think Mama's kind of summary of it and some of the stats that she gave, I think we're right on, and we're actually some of the stats that we've been distributing both with the governor's office and with other stakeholders. And I think it's important, perhaps if I was to add anything to that explanation up front, is just to understand kind of the scope and scale of the issue. We talked about 150,000 home shortage right now, over 200,000 in the next 5 years. What that translates to, though, is that Illinois would need to triple its new home construction every single year for the next 5 years just to meet the current demand. And that obviously just should immediately show you how difficult it's going to be for Illinois to start to catch up on providing the number of homes that we really need across the state.
Sure.
So to say that it is, an economic problem, we mentioned at the outset what it's cost the state already, which is almost $1 trillion in 5 years. Those are staggering numbers, but also it just helps to understand, wow, we have to really get moving very quickly if we're going to really start to put a dent in this problem and address affordability for everyone here.
Okay. Doug Pollock, you're in Riverside. Do you agree that there's a need for more housing?
Certainly, we agree that statewide there's a need for more housing.
Right. What does the affordable housing situation look like in Riverside in the western suburbs?
Well, Riverside has a decent supply of affordable housing. In fact, we were exempt from the 2003 Affordable Housing Act because we had met the minimum criteria or minimum threshold for affordable housing. We agree. I think most municipalities agree that an ample supply of housing and affordable housing should be a policy of state and local governments. Mm-hmm. But that should not be the only goal of a housing policy.
Sure. We'll get to your concerns in just a minute. Sure. Jeff, where you're living, what does affordable housing look like? Is there enough?
Well, I think what's really important just at the outset is to create a distinction between affordable and attainable. The state already has multiple programs and hundreds of millions of dollars devoted to affordable housing programs. And for example, the statewide Affordable Housing Act that the village president just mentioned is something that pertains to subsidized low-income housing. And what the build plan really addresses is attainable housing, missing middle housing that is not low-income subsidized housing. So I think that that's a really important distinction to make. And what we see, more specifically to your question, though, is that in almost every single community across the state, there is a lack of that attainable housing. There is almost no missing middle housing.
Right. So are you talking about like starter homes, like which there are very, very few of, as the stories that I'm reading, there are very few like starter homes, a small, kind of affordable-ish home that somebody that would be their first home.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you kind of got to it at the very opening of the segment where you talked about, what housing supply is available, but then what the current prices of those homes are. So the homes that are available aren't starter homes or even, second homes for growing families, for example.
Right.
These are families and individuals who are making good money, who are making 100% or 120% of AMI for the area of the state that they live in, and they still can't afford the homes because what is available is so far out of their price range, which gets to, and we're happy to talk about, why is it that we can only build right now at that high end? But if that's all that's available, you're not going to have workforce housing. You're not going to have housing that's affordable for folks who don't need government subsidies in order to get into their first home.
All right. Doug Pollock, I want to know, what are you hearing from Riverside community members about this attainable housing that Jeff Baker is bringing up? What are you hearing?
Well, we're hearing a lot of concerns about how it impacts the quality of neighborhoods.
Okay.
As I said, affordable housing, ample supply of housing, attainable housing, those are all legitimate policy goals for the state and for local government. But I think residents of Illinois deserve more than that. They deserve an ample supply of housing. They deserve to have housing they can attain and afford, but they also deserve quality communities.
Sure.
And
good schools, nice streets,
good neighborhoods,
parks,
a mix of housing in a neighborhood. And I think the Build Illinois plan falls short of that.
Tell me more about your concerns.
Sure. Build Illinois does not take into consideration, in my opinion, the unique character of each neighborhood and community. Local zoning and local land use policy allows municipalities to target locations for middle housing such as duplexes and townhomes that fit into a community, that fit into a neighborhood and complement the neighborhood. It also allows local land use policy allows municipalities to create standards for middle housing that fit the neighborhood and make for a better community, better living situation for those residents. Encouragement and incentives from the state are appropriate, and I think they're needed. The details, however, are best left at the local level.
Right. You don't want a state mandate. You would like to say, oh, here's this framework. Let's figure out how Riverside can do it.
Correct. And for example, if the state were to say, local government, you need to amend your zoning to increase the amount of middle housing by X percent, then leave it up to us to figure out where that goes, how that goes, what those standards are. And we could that will actually enhance the quality of neighborhoods. Whereas just a mandate that just says everywhere you can do middle housing, there's a lot of potential for unintended consequences from legislation like that.
Sure. So you think it's not well thought out on your level?
I think it needs more work.
Okay.
I think it needs to be developed so that there's more local control over the quality of that housing and where it's located, and making sure that it complements neighborhoods and doesn't just become a haphazard infusion of development.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. So Governor Pritzker joined AmeriCorps broker Matt Laracy on a podcast called Re-Up. Here's what the governor had to say in a preview of the episode on social media.
What we're trying to do is just add a few homes all across the state of Illinois. Again, it's not designed so that you're going to see all these massive buildings going up in places where they don't belong. But again, why are we restricting people from taking an apartment that's above a garage and not make it into a small home for somebody? It could be a home for a single person, right? And why are we not allowing that all across the state of Illinois?
All right, Jeff Baker, the governor says this isn't about building massive developments in places they don't belong. Tell us, what do you make of that concern? Is there some validity there?
No, I think that some of the arguments that have been made to kind of generate opposition to the build plan have tried to focus on this, words like character and words like local control. And I think when you get down to the actual facts of what the bill says, and then also look at other examples of where this has already been done, because quite frankly, Illinois is a little bit behind the ball on this. There's roughly about a dozen other states that have implemented some form of what we're talking about in the build plan. And so when you look at what the build plan actually says regarding local control, first off, is that it preserves the ability for municipalities to make local decisions about, for example, their comprehensive plan and their city layouts, lot size, designations. So all of that is preserved in the build plan. Local.
What about the build plan works for you? What are you excited about?
Well, I think that it's exactly what the governor was just alluding to there on that podcast, which is where you see this has already been done. You see gentle or moderate increases in density in communities all over the state where this has already been done. You don't see widespread conversions. You don't see widespread development of sky rises or massive, apartment complexes. What you see is more gentle additions to density in neighborhoods. You see one or two ADUs added here or there. You see a few more duplexes. You see a few more townhomes. Mm-hmm. And it is that gentle increase in supply, which, number one, moderates home price appreciation in the community, and number two, adds an element of supply that is already more moderately priced. So I think that once you start to see the evidence that's happened in other communities or other states where this has already been done, you start to see the positives for what can happen in this state. Real quickly, I would also say the possibilities of cutting back on permit or cutting down the time for permit review poses a lot of positive potential for cities that are actually open-minded about new housing supply. Permit delays, city approvals, regulatory red tape slows down new housing supply greatly across the state and adds thousands of dollars to the cost of new homes. Impact fee reform is going to be incredibly beneficial across the state and to the communities that require or that rely upon impact fees in their municipal budgets. So I think that the positives are incredible for the state. And like I said, the stats just show that we're beyond the time for getting started on this. So it needs to happen sooner rather than later.
Okay. Doug, you told one of our producers that you were at a lunch with mayors throughout West Cook County, and you all talked about this build plan. Take us to lunch with you. What did you learn from your peers? What are they saying?
The concern is the impact on the quality of neighborhoods and the lack of guardrails on this legislation. Everything that Mr. Baker said, I tend to agree with. Mm-hmm. A moderate change to neighborhoods is doable, is sustainable for communities. But as I read this legislation, there's no guardrails to ensure that. Whereas most of the impact may be moderate, there's still the potential for significant impact on specific neighborhoods.
Sure.
And I think local municipal leaders just would like to see more guardrails, more ability to influence where and how this middle housing is built.
Okay, fair enough. Maybe you and Jeff should have lunch together and hammer out these concerns. All right. I want to thank you both for your time. You've been hearing from the Riverside Village President, Doug Pollock, and also Jeff Baker, who is CEO of Illinois Realtors. State lawmakers have until the end of this month to finalize their budget and maybe pass any key bills, including potentially this build plan. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time.